So welcome to DWP 2022. This season, our theme is whoever controls Africa runs the world. And over the last few episodes, we have concentrated on trying to grasp Pan-Africanism and how it jives in with aims of African unity, basically by demonstrating that Pan-Africanism is the vision which existed well before independence, a vision which does not see individual boundaries. But African unity has been driven by the reality of colonialism, where at the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, they chose to stick with those borders and also protect sovereignty and ban any form of interference with each other's countries. So today, in episode 12, we are basically going to then take from our understanding of Pan-Africanism, African unity, and how especially the Africa Union was formed in 2002. That then forms the basis on which we going to examine the question, what has happened 20 years later after the Africa Union? Are we doing much better than we did with the Organization of African Unity when it comes to redefining ourselves as Africans, redefining ourselves culturally, redefining ourselves politically and economically? So all this has a huge bearing on Africa's capacity to control itself, to control its resources, so that these resources can be better utilized for Africa's development as opposed to the development of other superpowers who currently control Africa's resources and are still able to manipulate us politically and economically. So let's look at the facts first so that we can actually have a more interesting analysis. Fact number one is really just the importance of distinguishing the Africa Union from the Africa Union Commission, since we tend to use these interchangeably. So the Africa Union is actually then the heads of states, the 55 heads of states and the structures they've collectively put together through the Constitutive Act to make it possible to have their own parliament, their own court system, and various other structures that the heads of states used to make policies. Then the Africa Union Commission is the government of the Africa Union. This is the premier organization which implements, is the civil service of the Africa Union. And as such, the Africa Union Commission, together with its sister organization, the Africa Union Development Agency, they have created many departments, at least 9 departments in the Africa Union Commission to cover all spheres of society, from issues of agriculture, rural transformation, to issues of education, science, technology, legal issues, political affairs, infrastructure, name it. So today, we bring you this distinction because it then becomes important to figure out how each has fared, how has the African Union fared is the question today, as compared to the Organization of African Unity. We're not going to talk about the African Union Commission today. That will be the next session, session 13. But both sessions, we are asking the question, how far have we gone with the African Union since 2002 to today, 20 years later, in terms of the desired movement towards an African Union government, towards the unification of Africa, towards an Africa that controls itself culturally, politically, and economically. Fact number 2 is that the African Union was established with one major strength, which the Organization of African Union, its predecessor, did not have. And outside here, a report which was actually made for the African Union on progress made with the implementation of its decisions, just to see how that works. Now, the distinction between African Union and Organization of African Unity before it is that the African Union, through the Constitutive Act, makes it possible for member states to cede some of their, call it autonomy, to the African Union, and also forced to comply with the decisions of the African Union. However, this report I'm citing here was prepared in 2018. The report is entitled Decisions on the Progress Report on the Status of Implementation of Assembly Decisions. And it's very clear in the report that there is considerable resistance to the issue of interference by the member states. There's considerable reluctance by member states towards any kind of binding action by the African Union. The member states are actually opposing more and more any coercive mechanisms, such as the Arusha-based Africa Court of Justice, which was actually established by the AU for purposes, amongst others, of enforcing decisions or binding decisions. So somehow, member states are still quite reluctant to sanction other member states for non-implementation of these decisions. So I think it's an important fact as we assess how far we are going with the African Union 20 years later. Number 3 is that although the regional economic commissions are cited at the formation of the African Union as the main instrument for regional integration, as the main instruments who, once they themselves harmonize their own mechanisms, policies, and procedures, will automatically then see greater integration of Africa. But the question is, how far 20 years later have the regional economic commissions really assumed pole position in this role? Well, I would say that the jury is still out on that, how far we have gone over the last 20 years. One thing that's clear, though, is that when it comes to business of the African Union, when it comes to the political side of it, elections of commissioners, of the various positions, there seems to be a good balance between actually at regional level, caucusing happening there and, horse trading and so on. But when it comes to the actual elections, I mean, individual countries still carry the vote. So those are the kinds of checks and balances to ensure regional balance continues, although the total voting rights are not totally ceded to the region. But when it comes to issues of economics and trade, we could say efforts for integration with the regional economic commissions as the major driving force. There's been some progress in some areas, but also there hasn't been much progress in other areas, especially when it comes to free trade and relaxation of customs and so on. But we will devote an entire session on the regional economic commissions in a future session. Then in 2017, the Africa Union commissioned a committee. They named it the Reforms Advisory Committee, headed by Paul Kagame. And this committee came with some fairly substantive recommendations on how to improve the performance of the Africa Union and its constituent bodies. I'll just go through the main ones here and just touch on some of the things that, in fact, I'll give you the summary of the main ones that came from the committee. The first, what the committee was recommending to the AU that there's too many activities. It needs to limit these and have a way of choosing the key priorities. The assessors and other commentators seem to think that on that one, it's a much more long-term agenda. Not much has been achieved, but in reality, there has been quite a move towards putting in place at least more planning mechanisms to limit the number of priorities. The second area is in terms of improving the performance of the constituent bodies, putting in place mechanisms to review such bodies and how they perform. Once again, a work in progress. Number 3 was strengthening links between the Africa Union and its citizens, which for most of commentators is a good point. It's the difference between the OAU and the AU is that the Organization of African Unity literally did not have much room and space for ordinary citizens and citizens' organizations, and including diaspora, to participate. The Africa Union is actually much more desirous for that to happen, but still concedes itself that a lot still needs to happen to actually see more of that. The fourth thing, recommendation from the Reforms Advisory Committee was overall efficiency and effectiveness of the organization, which once again, the number of specific recommendations were made, and quite a few of those are already in effect as we speak. Well, number 5 was sustainable financing, because the Africa Union was a fairly dependent organization, still is, but the Reform Committee was pushing for even greater sustainable financing of the organization. And this actually has happened. There's been marked improvement. I will touch on that in this session again later in detail, since this is just a summary. Then reducing dependence on development partners. Also, a number of key recommendations were made, and it seems already over the last 5 or so years, there's been significant reduction in the dependence on development partners, which is good news. Fact number 5, the Africa Union, especially through its Africa Union Commission, has rolled out many important flagship programs. And these are underway. We'll review them for you in another session. But just to give you a taste, how busy the AU and AUC and AUD, AUDA, NEPAD have been. I mean, probably the most significant of the flagships is the Agenda 2063, which maps out a 50-year vision and strategy and priorities and aspirations for the Africa Union. The other real serious milestone was when in 2020, finally the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was launched, and it's a massive thing. It's an important development for African unity and integration. We'll devote a session onto that in future. And there are many other ones. Like I say, these are the key ones. I thought I'd just give you a taste of what's going to come. In the area of peace and security, there's been relative success, much more success than during the period of OAU. The Peace Fund of the Africa Union was able to raise almost $180 million by 2020 from actually a 0.2 tax on imports. Can you imagine? I mean, okay, the target was 400 million, but the fact that these resources were raised entirely from the Africa Union member states is quite impressive, especially given that some of the bigger nations were a bit skeptical about this one. You know, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, they were a little reluctant at first, but in the end, all member states showed great desire to start financing on peace and security efforts. After all, the United Nations itself, the Security Council of the UN, is more and more reluctant to increase its contributions to peace and security in Africa. So that's why this fund is important. Needless to say at this point, though, that this is far from being enough. The African Union is still very much dependent on the former colonial masters for peace and security issues, which is really a little bit disheartening, given that we still live in these era of Cold Wars. But the number of conflicts on the continent has declined. There's still quite a few. There's always a few, but Africa enjoys much more relative peace and security than during the OAU days. Fact number 7 is now enunciating a bit more on the positive dynamic of Africa Union's financial autonomy. This is illustrated mainly by the structure of its budget now, which is now quite clearly structured between its core budget, its own operations budget, as well as the programs. And in summary, the Africa Union, for the first time over the last decade, finances its operations budgets entirely. Doesn't need any donors. It is financing all the operations. They still have development partners contributing to their programs. But even then, I'll just give you some summary figures here. So since the Kigali Summit of 2016, the share of the AU budget actually as the share of the African Union's development partners has actually dropped from about 73% then, around 2016-17, to around 58-59% today. As I say, member states now fully finance the operations budget. And when you go to the actual programs budget, which was in the past totally funded by development partners, today the development partners only finance about 58 to 60%, and the African Union has taken over at almost 40% of its programs budget. It's quite impressive. 100% of the operations budget and 40% of the programs budget. I mean, this is a major milestone. The weakest area, as I said earlier, was really the peace and security area, where although the Peace Fund has managed to raise a bit of money from the African member states, the European Union former colonial masters still very much drive our peace and security financing. Number 8 fact is that after the Obasanjo Committee of 2006, pushing back the Pan-Africanist agenda, almost immediately was formed a conference of ministers in charge of border affairs. I mean, these have been meeting regularly. I mean, they've met quite regularly since then, and they have really been inspired by this conviction to achieve greater unity and solidarity amongst African states, and recognition that ordinary Africans require a reduction in the burden of crossing borders that artificially separate African states. So they are looking for ways, and decisions have been made, including resolutions down the road, helping to transcend these borders and barriers and promoting bridges linking one African state to the other and so on, and reopening efforts to integrate the continent physically where there are artificial borders, and strengthening unity, also actually promoting peace and stability across the region. So those are the facts I wanted to put on the table as to what the Africa Union has achieved over the last 20 years since its establishment in 2002. And then let's be back for the analysis and see you shortly. Thank you. Welcome back to the analysis. So how far have we gone with the Africa Union towards an Africa Unity government envisaged as the key transformation from OAU to AU? The key transformation was transmuting the older organization to one that really had capacity to accelerate the pace of the Pan-Africanist agenda. So I think it was clear in the previous sessions that the Africa Union definitely came in with a number of mechanisms which would ensure greater commitment between member states, even elements of interference in each other's affairs through legal means to ensure peace, prosperity, stability, and so on. But how far are we really towards that Africa Union government after 20 years of the Africa Union? So the calls are getting louder and louder in Africa. Africans would really want to see greater cultural definition of Africans. I mean, it's clear that the world is not going to stabilize. The Cold Wars are going to keep expanding their effect of life. And as long as Africa is not united, as long as we don't have one voice, as long as we're not strong enough, as long as we're in Africa that does not control its resources, we're going to be picked one by one by the Cold War heavyweights and lose like we've always lost over the last couple of 100 years. So my worry is that if you actually look at the Obasanjo Committee in 2006, I mean, this is a few years after the Africa Union is formed. That committee and the reception its report got was a lot of enthusiasm towards actually rejuvenating serious membership commitment to decisions made by the Africa Union. And kudos to the Africa Union, they actually put in place mechanisms to do so. And we will talk in a second as to why these mechanisms may or may not be performing as well as they should. Because if we actually look at the failure of member states to agree or even enforce the implementation of AU's decisions, this may be worrisome, and I'm a little concerned about it. It gives a bit of feeling that we're back to the Organization of African Unity, non-interference, etc., etc. But there is a positive side, as I say, where the AU has actually put in place the mechanism. They put in place this judicial control mechanism in the name of the Africa Union's Court of Justice based in Arusha. And that court in Arusha is a protocol that's been put into effect and approved by the AU. So it is actually a dog that can bite. It's just that the African Union has decided to wait. It has not yet been faced with a situation where it will unleash this tool. So my thinking is, although I'm a little, so to speak, disillusioned that after such a brilliant structural reform in 2002, eventually coming up with a mechanism that would ensure that when decisions are made by 55 members, all members should comply or face a legal action. This mechanism is there, it's ready, but it's not been used yet. If we go back to Obasanjo Committee's recommendation of more deliberate gradualism in the way we move, I think it's a matter of time. Someday, some event will take place where the African Union is going to unanimously or overwhelmingly say, now let's put into effect this legal tool. And I'm telling you, once it hasn't happened in 20 years, I think within the next 5 years, it may happen because of the way things are going in the world. So it's still to come, I hope. The other issue for analysis I would like to put on the table is that the dialectic still remains as to, once again, are we in all these Africa Union structures and programs clear whether the dialectic still is around a redefined African cultural, political, and economic definition, or we are still talking of some hybrids of sorts? Maybe we are an Africa Union with an Africa Union Commission, which is more like the European Union or ASEAN or whatever. This dialectic is not receiving enough attention. And even when one looks at the many, many flagship programs of the Africa Union and its activities, you hardly see a powerful cultural integration agenda or programs that drive towards cultural and political integration of Africa. So I think it's something that I'd like to leave in the analysis for you to think about. Fifth are the regional economic communities, because I think the Africa Union was quite right, and they are still committed to have the regional economic commissions as the major on-the-ground vehicle to integrate Africa. Because if the regional economic commissions themselves harmonize their own protocols, their own policies and systems over time, then it makes sense that regional integration will progress faster. However, it will still appear that individual countries within the regional blocs still reposition themselves here and there, especially the powerful ones. Where it suits them, obviously position themselves within the regional consensus, where it suits themselves. They'll always take an outside position and sign deals, treaties, whatever, with external partners, and sometimes even, so to speak, make it difficult to see how a region can have a trade policy that will be adhered to by everybody, and so on and so forth. So it's another one that needs further analysis. On the reform agenda, which was put on the AU agenda by the Reform Committee led by Paul Kagame, I was impressed by the list of issues that were addressed. But they appeared to be mostly institutional, organizational performance issues in place. I found that absent on the list is, once again, the cultural and political redefinition of Africans as the major engine that sees us more desirous of regional integration, and that sees us seeing more and more non-governmental citizens participating in this agenda, which brings me to that point. That African citizens and our diaspora is inching. They have always been there, mind you. I mean, it was the diaspora in the 1890s which really started institutionalizing ideas of Pan-Africanism. And a lot of activists, scholars, ordinary citizens really are looking forward to the Africa Union. That makes it easier for us to share our historical and cultural values as Africans. And the collective self-reliance of Africans is key in the diaspora discourse. And as citizens discuss these issues of self-sufficiency and political freedoms in the broadest sense of the word, because at the end of the day, there's no other culture in the world which truly understands humanity and freedom than Africans. So I would say that the African Union and the African Union Commission, its government, they have embraced this whole issue of incorporating and participation of African citizens and its diaspora. It just requires a number of maybe seriously deep flagship program for it. As I conclude, I would say a lot of progress has been made over 20 years. We're slightly over 50% old as AU compared to the Organization of African Unity, which fizzled out just under 50 years old. Now, if you look at the Lagos Plan of Action, which envisaged the Africa Economic Community, and today we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, I would say we on the economic side, there's more. Let's put it. I suppose politics is always a difficult one, and therefore we tend to then put economic development in front as if it in itself can then bring with it cultural and political integration. But we will see. The danger is that in slowing down the Obasanjo Committee's anticipated pace. I mean, remember, the Obasanjo Committee's recommendations were overwhelmingly accepted. And a lot of what we see in terms of regional integration, in terms of a really biting a court of justice which can ensure members stick to decisions, all that was going to be achieved by 2015. So it will be difficult to achieve this, not just in the administrative, political, policy arena, but even in the economic arena, where individual countries will still sign trade agreements and other economic partnership agreements which really are not in the interests of African integration. But there it is. That's the colonial trauma for us. And I'm just saying that maybe this time to press the refresh button for the African Union. I don't know whether there's going to be a 20-year review of African Union. Deeply, I've seen a report that reviews some of the African Union Commission programs, but the African Union itself, it would be fantastic. And one of the things I would hope will be looked at is what happened to the initial enthusiasm brought in by the Obasanjo Committee report of accelerating the pace of Pan-Africanism, African unity, integration, and seeing an African Union government in a much shorter space of time. I would think that would be an important thing to review. So I'll leave it at that in terms of the analysis. See you shortly as we conclude. So, welcome back to the concluding section. Let's try and conclude on this question. The African Union 20 years later, in 2022, where are we? Have we done better than OAU? And what are the prospects of seeing a unified Africa, an Africa that fully understands that at the moment it does not really control its resources, and that other superpowers that are able to manipulate its resources control the world? So how far are we towards an Africa that truly controls its resources culturally, politically, and economically? That's really the issue, and therefore would carry a brand Africa that's just fantastically effective. Although the whole transition from OAU to the African Union was a really great leap. The African Union came in with many more powerful tools. It still does. And over the last 20 years has actually used these tools much more effectively in some areas than others. My conclusion is that because of the philosophy of this gradual incrementalism, it's been easier to push some of the programs in the economic development areas where it's less politically sensitive. It's much more difficult to push this agenda in the political areas. And when we just look generally at the non-compliance aspect of member states, as I say, it may be a bit disappointing, but the most important positive point is to say that the African Union does have in place the mechanisms to actually enforce whatever decisions are collectively made at African Union. It does have the mechanisms. It has the Court of Justice based in Arusha and protocols to implement it. It's got an increasing budget for peace and security. It fully finances its operations budget, which means that sooner or later we're going to see the beginnings of a African Union government behavior. And that's what most Africans are looking for. So the challenges that remain make it difficult because of the Cold War, where superpowers would still want to see a weak Africa where they can still control the resources. They continue to be the big manufacturing giants. We continue to consume their finished products, which they finish using our resources. So it's important for Africans to realize that the African Union is all we have at the moment. We can't afford to be so overcritical of it that we start telling ourselves we got an alternative. We really need to rally behind it and focus on its strengths. Look at those weaknesses and bring in the ordinary citizens and diaspora into place. Because I think now the ordinary citizens and the diaspora are badly needed. This is how we're going to move faster towards the ideals of Pan-Africanism. These are the ideals towards self-reliance, because the answers lie within Africa. The answers lie within us as Africans. The truth that we discover for ourselves through really collective action is what counts. It requires boldness, and it requires commitment so that Africans can continue to enjoy a bigger and better and brighter brand Africa, which exudes all the true African values, all the ideal values that Africans have always pushed through Ubuntu, Hutu, Udugu, Africa brand that exudes mother of the world, not its kind of dependent child. A brand Africa that begins to show Africa's immense creativity and workmanship in all areas. A brand Africa that really exudes humanity and love for family and community. A breath of fresh air. So once again, we'll be back next week. Now that we have looked at Africa Union, next week we'll look at the Africa Union Commission itself and how its main programs over the last 20 years are pushing us towards greater integration and African unity. See you then. Thank you so much. Bye.
So my name is Mandi Rukuni. I authored this book, Being African, which I'm recommending to you. You stand a chance of winning a copy of this book in the DWP competitions. But I wrote this book primarily because we Africans often confuse Westernization with modernization. So this book goes through what it takes for us to modernize Africa using our heritage rather than Westernizing it. So Hunu, Botu, Ubuntu, Udugu is what this book is about. I recommend it to you highly, and those who want the practical side of how to succeed using heritage values, you can go to the small handbook of African Pathways to Success. Look forward to you participating in the competition. Thank you.
Stand a chance to win a copy of the book, Being African, or the booklet, African Pathways to Success, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni, and leaving a comment on one of our recent videos. You can also like our Facebook page and comment on a recent post. If you're on Instagram, follow the profile Prof Mandi Rukuni and leave a comment on a recent post as well. A random participant will be chosen at the end of the month and will be contacted and given the book.